World Rugby, they've announced both their player and their team of the decade. Now, I've done enough Dream Team or Players of the Year, Players of the Tournament videos on this channel to know that as soon as you name this kind of team, pretty much all the comments are going to be, this guy sucks, you should have gone with this guy. And sure enough, the same has kind of happened here. I'll go over the 15 players they have chosen. I mean, to be honest, some of them I don't agree with, but that's the nature of these teams, right? Nobody's ever going to agree on their top 15. Everyone's going to have different opinions. So that's a good conversation starter anyway from World Rugby. Maybe a little bit questionable. But yeah, I'll go over the guys. Maybe suggest some other guys who potentially could have got in or didn't get in for whatever reason. And yeah, you guys can let me know what your thoughts were as well. In terms of the makeup, 7 Kiwis, 3 South Africans, 2 Irish, a Welshman, an Italian, and an Australian. No English, no French, no Argentinians, and the list goes on. Nobody from any tier 2 countries. But yeah, we'll go over the list. The front row, they went with Tendai and Tawera, the beast at loose head. They went with Bismarck du Plessis at hooker, and they went with Owen Franks at tight head. So 2 Springboks and an All Black. Now, I'm kind of on the record with the teams of the decade thing, saying the reason I never did one is because it's just a random 10 years, right? Like, if you look at the Beast's career, it pretty much fits in with this 10-year period pretty well. 2008 to 2019, he played, because they cut off as the end of 2019, he played the majority of his career in this decade. He won a Rugby World Cup at the end of the decade. Yeah, he had a pretty long career, maintained his Springbok spot that whole time. His career in that decade had ups and downs. He looked to be going off the boil and had a bit of a renaissance towards the end of his career. But overall, man, the course of the decade, he played a lot of international rugby, a lot of Super Rugby at that position. So I can live with that. I'm pretty happy with the Beast. He's a pretty good player. Some people, I saw moaning about him as well, but I don't know. I rate the Beast. Bismarck du Plessis. He's an interesting one because he finished his international career after the 2015 Rugby World Cup, so half of the decade. This is what I mean about the time frame. It's a hard one to judge. He kept playing at club level the whole time. Obviously, he's still playing now, right? But he essentially stopped playing international rugby in 2015. So he's only done half the decade. Is he better than some guys who played the majority of the decade? Did he do enough in that time to pip some of those other guys? Does he do it enough at club level to show that he's still like the best hooker of the last 10 years? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think hooker was one that was an obviously number one guy one. But the other guy is Owen Franks. And again, kind of like the Beast, 2009 to 2019, he didn't make the Rugby World Cup squad, so his career finishes on a little bit of a sour note. Some people who still watch the Premiership say since going to the Northern Hemisphere, he's not quite been that same player. But man, over those 10 years, he was pretty bloody consistent. Hell of a scrummager. Very, very solid in that department. Never got any huge stats around tackle busts. He got solid tackle rate without being extraordinary. Never a great ball carrier, try scorer, that kind of thing. But very, very solid scrummaging prop for the majority of those 10 years. So again, I can kind of live with that one. I had a think about some other guys. Tyke Furlong, he's only played for like 5 years of the last decade as well, even though he's had a couple of years where he was clearly like one of the, if not the best prop in the world. Mako Vunipolas had a pretty long career, but injuries, limited number of caps. Hooker, Dane Coles has been playing since 2012. So I'd say he'd have more international caps in that meantime than Bismarck. But he's also had his injury worries too. Augustine Crevi, if you're thinking of an Argentinian, he played pretty consistently over those 10 years, didn't he? Stormed into life with the Jaguares as well as captain. So, But you guys let me know your thoughts on some other front rowers that could have made it. Locks, they've gone with 2 Kiwi locks, Brodie Retallick and Sam Whitelock. And both of these guys have played the majority of their career again in this right time frame. Brodie's 2012 to 2019, so the majority of that decade. Sam Whitelock literally from 2010 through till 2020. So perfect in terms of picking a player of the decade. Brodie was World Player of the Year once, which is pretty good achievement for a lock. Front rowers virtually never get it. Props have never even been nominated. They just don't get that nomination. People don't seem to rate what they do, despite how crucial they are to the game. Whitelock's been pretty consistent over the 10 years as well. There's been other good locks. Etzebeth's had a pretty big career over that time. He's played bugger all Super Rugby with his injuries, but he always seemed to be available for the Springboks. Alan Wynne-Jones, he's been nominated for Player of the Year twice. Never managed to pick it up, but again, for a lock, that's a pretty good achievement. Itoje has only been playing for like 4 years of the decade, I think. So maybe that was kind of not in his favour compared to these two guys who played the majority of that time. Back rowers, they've gone with Pocock at 6, McCaw at 7, and Parise at 8. And McCaw, I should mention, is the player of the decade. So of these 15 guys, he's your top dog. Which is again interesting because he finishes his rugby career in 2015. So he literally plays half the decade. But the dude's a legend of the game. Some of the stuff he did, which we remember would maybe be prior to 2010, but it's hard to tell your brain not to take that kind of stuff into account. But he wins the 2011 World Cup, he wins the 2015 World Cup, retires on a high, hell of a winning record, hell of a team, gets a Player of the Year award in 2010, he gets one more nomination. He seems like a pretty top bloke. He retired after the World Cup, so he literally goes out on a high. There's no like club career off in France where he kind of loses a spot to somebody else. Yeah. But again, half of the time. I think I voted for him when they had the voting, like the fans voting. I voted for Richie. Anyway, Pocock at 6 is an interesting one because he's moved around a bit, man. He's had 6, 7, and 8 on his back. I don't know how many tests he played at 6. I mean, he's a 3-time Player of the Year nominee. 3 times, so he's been a hell of a player for Australia. Career from 2008 through to 2019. Obviously, he missed some time with injury as well, but that's about the right time for him. Again, majority of that career in that decade. I think went to 3 World Cups, made a World Cup final. For a lot of the time, the best player Australia had. I do feel like they kind of just wanted to slip him in a little bit. They wanted to put him in, so they just put him at 6. I don't know that he's the best 6 of that decade. If you're looking for an out-and-out 6, you're thinking someone like Dusatois or someone like Jerome Kaino, maybe. There's other guys as well, but those are just kind of guys that come to my mind. Dusatois won Player of the Year. Kaino, I think, nominated for Player of the Year. Kaino played past 2015 as well. Remember, he went into like 2017, even if he was slightly on the decline, but he's had a bloody good career in France as well as he's gone on, so... But yeah, Pocock, maybe not an out-and-out 6, not the best 6 of the decade, but he certainly deserves a spot somewhere. If McCaw's not there, maybe he gets 7. Maybe you could argue he should be above McCaw for 7 for the decade. Just saying, because McCaw only played half. Anyway, Parise gets your role at number 8, which is, I mean, it's interesting that an Italian gets in above Frenchmen and, you know, Englishmen and Argentinians and whatnot, just given Italy's record is pretty poor, which speaks to how highly regarded Parise is as a player. Even on a bad team, he manages to stand out. You got to wonder if he'd played for another country. If he was a Kiwi, how good would he have been? Would he have gotten a place ahead of Kieran Reid? That seems to be the argument. Kieran Reid was also a Player of the Year, World Player of the Year. Parise got nominated, but I don't think he ever won it. Kieran Reid's the main one. Maybe Dwayne Vermeulen as well. I think Kieran Reid would have a lot more caps over him for the decade. But, yeah, Parise. As I said, it's tough if you're in a team which is losing all the time to get the recognition. But Parise seems to have done it. So he mentioned in a little video that, like, you know, he's more about the team than about individual awards. But, yeah, anyway. Into the backs. They've gone with Connor Murray as the scrum half of the decade. He's had a career which pretty much fits the same timelines as well, 2011 through till now. He's British and Irish Lion. He's won the Six Nations 3 times, Grand Slam. New Zealanders will be livid that it's not Aaron Smith. You could make an argument that it could have been Will Guinea, but again, Guinea was probably at his best towards the start of the decade, and your brain kind of wants to remember the more recent stuff where he's not been that player that he was at the start of the decade. But yeah, Aaron Smith played from 2012 until now. Guinea played from like 2008. He was a Player of the Year nominee as well, was Guinea. I don't think Smith's ever been nominated. Smith maybe suffers a little bit due to the off the field bad reputation look and stuff. Maybe that's where he falls down a slight jot. But yeah, Murray is your man for number 9, so he's your first Irishman. Dan Carter gets the 10 jersey, and he's another one. Equal kind of legendary status here in New Zealand and World Rugby as just one of the greatest to ever play the game. But remember, he finished International Rugby 2015, so half the decade. But he wins 2 World Cups, one of them kind of injured, and then a key player in that 2015 World Cup. Keeps playing his club footy, goes to Japan, goes to France. But again, like people told me, I didn't watch enough of him in France, but said the results were a bit mixed. So came to the Blues. He's a Blues legend for finishing his career with the Blues. Didn't get any games, but helped out with the coaching. So we'll claim him. But yeah, he was probably pipped out. Him and Jonathan Sexton were pipped out for that Player of the Decade thing. Sexton's one guy you could argue could take the title of Player of the Decade because he certainly played more games in the decade than Dan Carter. Player of the Year in 2018. Owen Farrell, not going to win anybody's popularity contest outside of England, but remember, he's been playing since 2012, so he'd probably have more caps than Dan Carter in that decade as well. Pretty successful. Six Nations, World Cup final. Saracens have been winning all kinds of trophies. Maybe a bit split because he tends to split his time between 10 and 12. I think he's played more games at 12 now than at 10 for England, so maybe that's a tough one for him. British and Irish Lion, 2-time Player of the Year nominee. Like I mentioned, not that popular, but still good player. Beauden Barrett, 2-time Player of the Year winner in the decade. Been playing since like 2012, albeit at the start of his career he was at fullback. Won Super Rugby title with the Hurricanes. Could he be the Player of the Decade? It's the one you got to tell your brain not to do it because you think, who's the better player? Who's the better 10? Carter or Bodie? You say Carter, more complete player. But what about the decade? It's hard to split in your mind because Carter only played half the decade, whereas Bodie's still going. Anyway, midfielders, they've gone with Ma'anonu inside centre and Brian O'Driscoll outside centre. Nonu is another one who played through till 2015. Still going strong with his club. Played in France. Came back and played Super Rugby. Played in the MLR. Back to France. So club career is still going strong. He doesn't look to have really lost it, man. He's still going really well. International career 2015 is where it finishes. So half the time. Bloody good player. And then O'Driscoll, who I think of all the guys would have the least time at international level compared to everybody because he retired like 2014. Start of 2014, wasn't it? Six Nations he finished up? So he's played less than half the decade. It's another one where you have to split it in your mind. Brian O'Driscoll, is he one of the best outside centres the world's ever seen? Yeah. From 2010 to 2019? Probably not. Weren't his best years slightly before that? Yeah, Conrad Smith's another one. Pretty consistent guy. High performer, but again finished 2015. Jonathan Davis for Wales. British and Irish Lion a couple of times. Or at least in 2 series. Pretty bloody consistent over the last 10 years. Maybe more game time than Brian O'Driscoll, that's for sure. But there you go. And outside backs, they've gone with Habana on the left wing, George North on the right wing, and Ben Smith at fullback. So Brian Habana, I think, finished up with the Springboks 2016 and played with his club for a couple more years. Legendary status in the game, played more than half the decade. And then George North. Now, George North, I think his career was, I wrote it down, 2010 to now. So he's been playing consistently throughout the whole decade. Perfect timing. Julian Savia certainly had a better try scoring rate than George North, but Savia's career kind of went downhill a bit. I know George North's getting a lot of flack as well in recent times. But yeah, bang for your buck, Savia's maybe your man, but North more influence over the entire decade, you would probably say. But yeah, I guess if you were going to play Savi, you'd probably have to put him in for Habana because he pretty much played left wing rather than North. I don't know how many tests North would have on each wing. Have to look into the numbers. Ben Smith at fullback again. He's played his career pretty much the whole time during this decade, 2009 to 2019. 2015 World Cup winner, kind of lost his place for 2019. Wasn't having his best year, but Super Rugby winner, Player of the Year nominee. Yeah, pretty consistent guy over that time. Other guys who you might have considered. I forgot to mention Manu Tuilangi, but he hasn't played that many games in the scheme of things, seeing as he's been playing since like 2012, but a lot of injuries for him. I mentioned Savia. I wrote down kind of controversially Israel Folau. He played 2013 to like 2019. Player of the Year nominee, top try scorer ever in Super Rugby with 60 tries. But given the off-the-field stuff, again, was never going to be considered for this one. But yeah, just worth a mention in terms of just pure on-the-field rugby stuff. Johnny May, he's been playing since 2013. It's been a bit of a threat. But would you have him above Habana? Probably not. But yeah, so a lot of Kiwis, almost half the team. No Englishmen, no Frenchmen, no Argentinians, no Scotsmen. There's no spot for Finn Russell. I know Greg Laidlaw, I think, was the only Scottish nominated Player of the Year candidate in the last decade. But yeah, what do you guys reckon? As I said, it's always one where everyone's got their own thoughts on how it should be going down. I stick by the thought that it's really hard to contain it to that arbitrary 10-year period. It just happens to be 2010 to 2019. You got to think about not who's the better player, but who had more impact in that decade. And it's tough. It's tough. But anyway, what do you guys reckon? They did do other awards. They did sevens. They did the women's game. They did tries of the year. So check out World Rugby's like social media feed. There's a lot more content there. But in terms of the men's 15 and the player of the decade, which was Richie, that's your lot. What do you guys reckon? And yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.